President Trump has admonished pharmaceutical companies since the 2016 campaign and has even said they were, quote, getting away with murder. He has kept up his attacks on drug makers since then, too, and pledges his administration will bring down prescription prices.
U.S. drug companies have produced extraordinary results for our country, but the pricing has been astronomical for our country. You go out to stores and you go even in any community, rich or poor community, and you look at the kind of drug prices that we're paying, and it's really unfair what's happened in our country. One of my greatest priorities is to reduce the price of prescription drugs. And prices will come down substantially. Watch.
Well, now we know how the president plans to lower those prices. Earlier this month, the Trump administration introduced its blueprint to, quote, bring soaring drug prices back down to earth. Here's some of what the president said.
We will have tougher negotiation, more competition, and much lower prices at the pharmacy counter, and it'll start to take effect very soon. And we will not rest until this job of unfair pricing is a total victory for the USA. It will happen, and it's going to happen quickly.
Sarah Jane Tribble is a senior correspondent for Kaiser Health News, and she joins me now from Washington. All right, Sarah, President Trump said his administration was, quote, putting American patients first. What exactly is he proposing?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. And the proposal is a 44-page blueprint. And one of my favorite factoids from the week it came out is that there's about 130 questions in this proposal, as well as just kind of going over some broad strokes. But there are three major things that have really kind of resonated with the industry, and that includes negotiating prescription or Medicare Part D drugs a little bit more. So there's a certain set of drugs where it's restricted. You can't get less than 2 in a certain category. And they're talking about maybe making it 1 in a category so that the drug companies have to compete more for those specific drugs. In Part B, which is the hospital drugs, the drugs you get in the doctor's office or at the hospital, as opposed to Part D, which is the drugs you get at kind of when you go to the pharmacy and buy your Crestor, for example. So in Part B, what they're saying is maybe we can combine that into Part D so that insurance companies and pharmacy benefit managers can then begin negotiating the prices of those more expensive kind of specialty drugs. The Part B drugs, if you think about what you get at the doctor's office or the hospital, are often injectable drugs, chemotherapy drugs, rheumatoid arthritis drugs. These are very expensive drugs. And right now what happens is the hospitals and providers, they get paid an average sales price plus 6%. So people are talking about that as a significant change, if that can happen. And then finally, the final category is rebates. And we've heard a lot about kind of the prices that people are paying at the counter. And this is an area that President Trump says he could target, and his administration says they could target, where they can force the companies to give the rebates back to the consumer at the point of sale. So when you go to the pharmacy counter or when you buy your drug, you're going to get some more money back from the companies, and you're going to not pay as much for your drugs. They've talked about doing that, and they've also talked about just outlawing those rebates altogether.
Well, would any of these proposals, Sarah, take effect soon?
Secretary Azar has kind of positioned this as it will happen over weeks, months, and years. He says they're rewiring the American healthcare system.
And so I guess the question, though, a lot of people are wondering is, you know, do experts who look at this particular issue think that the president's proposals are actually going to reduce those out-of-pocket costs for many Americans? I mean, for instance, the example you just cited about the rebates, that sounds like something almost on the back end of the process, if I'm understanding correctly. Some people might say, why not have something at the front end of the process where the actual price is lower to begin with, so you don't need to have a rebate?
I think you, Elaine, have really honed in on a key point of this entire discussion, and that is list prices, the actual price of the drugs that the pharmaceutical companies are charging. And if you read through the document, nothing actually goes directly at the list prices. Secretary Azar has said he'd like to see the list prices moderate and come down eventually. But really, this plan, as the experts have said, kind of works around those edges and works within that system.
Well, the president accused the rest of the world of, quote unquote, freeloading off U.S. drug companies, linking soaring prescription drug prices in America to lower prices abroad. Help us understand this, Sarah. Are those two things actually connected? How much drugs cost Americans in this country? How much people in other countries pay for their drugs?
I think that President Trump is honing in on something that I think a lot of Americans feel a guttural reaction to. We know that we can order our drugs overseas and get them for a lower price. Secretary Azar even talked about this last week. He talked about how, you could maybe get drugs from Canada, but Canada's too small of a country for us to supply all of us drugs. But the bottom line is it would be very difficult for the president to force other countries to lower or increase the amount of the price they pay for drugs, and then that in return lower our drug costs. The experts I've talked to can't see a direct correlation.
Yeah, because those governments essentially negotiate directly with the drug companies, is that right?
Yeah, they have different healthcare systems and they use leverage. One of the interesting stories about this over the last couple of years is this idea of Medicare negotiation. Mm-hmm. You probably remember hearing President Trump promise we're going to negotiate. The question is how do you negotiate? And the administration has taken pains in the last few weeks to make us understand, to help us understand that their idea of negotiation is to move drugs around and to give more power for insurance companies and pharmacy benefit managers to negotiate drugs because maybe they don't have as many drugs to have in a category. They could say, okay, we're only going to accept one of you. But there's no talk of saying we're not going to take a drug. And that's because we value choice here in America, and the administration says it values that choice. In other countries, they do use that leverage, that bargaining tip.
So the
government
government says that we won't cover this unless you're able to come down with the price a little bit.
And sometimes companies walk away.
So I'm wondering if the rhetoric that was outlined during the campaign that we heard from President Trump on this specific issue then, based on what you just said about the approach that we are now seeing the administration, the president take, is that an evolution? Has that changed from what we originally heard from the president as he was a candidate promising to lower prescription drug prices?
This is an interesting question because he did come out and he said, we're going to negotiate Medicare. We're going to allow importation of drugs, right? And when you look at the proposal, it doesn't directly approach any of those. They do want to work around having other countries, the unfairness of it, as they call, and making it more fair that the U.S. doesn't pick up the entire tab for innovation of drugs. They are introducing some tools for Medicare negotiation and talking about those in their proposals. So it would be unfair to say they're not talking about those things, I think, but at the same time, it's not as clear cut. Elaine, one of the things that I want to point out here is when the Rose Garden speech happened, prices for pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies kind of went up afterwards. But in the week that followed, Secretary Azar, FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb, Secretary Seema Verma, they were all out talking about this drug price plan. And there's very much a bully pulpit that's being taken, very much the idea that if we can keep talking about this, if we put the pressure on the pharmaceutical companies, and make no mistake, they're trying to put the pressure on the companies to keep those prices down, that might have some kind of effect. At the pen and pad that Secretary Azar had with his administration, he held up his pen and he said, this pen has a lot of power. And he's right about that. He can do a lot of things administratively. He can also go to Congress and ask for some changes as well.
All right. Well, we'll continue to watch it. This is an issue obviously affecting millions of Americans. Sarah Jane Tribble, thanks so much, Sarah, for helping us understand it.
Thanks.